is blatantly partisan, and objectivity is not part of it, is David's point of view there. We welcome your thoughts. You can email the panel at rnz.co.nz. Do join us on Twitter at the panel RNZ, or you can text us 2101. Well, a proposed school near the town of Pukekohe in South Auckland is coming up against opposition from local farmers and politicians who say the area is prime agricultural land and shouldn't be built on. Franklin Local Board Chair Andy Baker says the land proposed for a new Kingsgate Christian school is smack bang in the best soils in the area. And while new schools were needed to cope with big housing projects, the proposed site was just the wrong place. But a spokesperson for Kingsway Trust, which wants to build the school, says it can't afford to build any closer to town, as land prices even just across the road are 3 times higher due to zoning. Now, with its unique volcanic soil, flat land and temperate conditions, Pukekohe is widely considered the food bowl of Auckland. The area accounts for 3.8% of New Zealand's fruit and veggie production, and a large chunk of that land has already been lost to urban development in recent years. So this is quite an interesting one, Nikki, and you might know a bit about it being a food writer and knowing how important these soils are. They're almost, as someone said, they're almost like a taonga, aren't they, these soils?
Yeah, they call them elite soils, actually.
Elite soils.
Yeah, and didn't we had this announced last year, middle of last year, that they actually have put some protections in place for these soils, which makes me wonder if...
A national policy statement on fertile soils,
yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, which I think is really, really important because, as someone pointed out in this case too, once the soils are built on, they're gone. You know, you can't plant things on them. So, but in this case, maybe the horse is already bolted because they seem to own that land, right?
Well, they've sort of zoned parts of it to, to be safeguarded as market gardens, but not other parts of it because of the pressure on urbanisation, to build more houses. But by golly, if Auckland sacrifices its market gardens, its fruit bowl and vegetable bowl,
that's it.
We'll be importing it from Napier, probably. Yeah.
Tricky one though, isn't it, Bill? Because Pukekohe is also fast growing. They need schools, and this school has every right to build on where they're building.
Well, that's right. I mean, look, if it's covered by the zoning that they can do it, then there's nothing you can do about it. But it's a dreadful waste of some beautiful soil.
Mm. And you know about that, Nikki, being a food writer, knowing how those potatoes and the species of potatoes they grow, for example, in Pukekohe, are unique even in the world, aren't they?
Yeah, they are amazing soils, and they're very productive soils. And if we think about what climate change is going to do, for example, we want to be keeping the most productive soils going. We don't want to be losing them. So the problem that growers are having is that urban pressure, actually. Because,
is it?
Well, yeah, because if you get a school or if you get housing close to where you're farming, then you get conflict between those two things, and often...
Oh, the spraying, for example.
Yeah, people start complaining about what's going on the farm.
Machinery.
Noise, dust, all the things that go along with farming of vegetables. And so, it's a pretty tricky situation unless those soils are protected. And people...
Yeah, I live amongst a couple of vineyards, or just there over the road. And it's lovely. I love hearing the noise and the stuff that goes on, but some people are just silly.
You live across the road from a vineyard?
2 vineyards.
Oh, my goodness.
Cab 7 in the evening?
It's funny you should mention that. Yeah.
Must be about wine time.
Nearly 5 o'clock. Bill Ralston and Nikki Bazan, thank you very much for being on the panel this afternoon with me, Wallace Chapman. I'm back with you at 3:45 tomorrow. Till then, see you later.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, 4 people are charged after a serious fraud office investigation into National Party donations. Simon Bridges is in the clear. A day after the election date drops, so does a $12 billion carrot. Officially, it's called the New Zealand Upgrade Programme, a mega spend on roads, rail, hospital and schools. Kiwi stuck in Wuhan, ground zero for coronavirus, are set to piggyback on Australia's evacuation mission, and to raise or not to raise the superannuation age, that is. New Zealanders' rubbish recycling rates are, well, rubbish. We check out an Auckland family's dirty habits, and we're there for the resurrection of a Southland train back from a muddy grave. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. The Serious Fraud Office has filed criminal charges against 4 people in relation to donations to the National Party. About 10 months ago, the agency began looking into a complaint first made to police by the former National MP Jamie Lee Ross. He claims the party leader Simon Bridges asked him to collect a $100,000 donation from a businessman and keep it secret. The SFO says the 4 defendants are scheduled to appear in the Auckland District Court in about a month. National says neither Mr Bridges nor party officials are among the 4 people being charged. Jamie Lee Ross has been approached for comment. The government has confirmed New Zealand and Australia will work together to evacuate people in Wuhan, the epicentre of the coronavirus outbreak in China. The Prime Minister says that she spoke with Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison this afternoon about a joint military exercise to get our people stuck in the city, which is completely locked down. There are currently 53 New Zealanders registered as being in Wuhan. Ms Ardern says specific details of the evacuation plan, including the medical protocols for returning New Zealanders, are being worked through by officials. A New Zealand woman stuck in Wuhan is anxious for more details about the evacuation plan. Vicky Lee took her 2 children to the city to visit her parents for the Chinese New Year. Her words are translated.
If we're going to be stuck here for a while and our problems can be solved, I have no complaints staying. But no one is trying to help us solve those problems. I phoned the New Zealand embassy earlier and they were on holiday. We've been left behind. Nobody cares. It's really hard on us.
Vicky Lee in Wuhan. Young climate campaigners say a huge spend up on roads is incredibly disappointing. The government has announced a $5.3 billion spend up to come out of the infrastructure fund. An environmental group, School Strike for Climate Auckland, says it welcomes investment in rail and Auckland's Skypath. But a spokesperson, Luke Wejon, says they are disappointed 4 times as much as being spent on a single motorway project.
$800 million is being spent on the Otaki to North Leven bypass alone. At the end of the day, this is a bunch of very bad projects grouped in with a bit of sweetener and cherry on top and then sold to us as climate action, as boosting the economy, when it's not.
Luke Wejon says it's a 20th century solution to 21st century problems. However, the AA says the country is in desperate need of more modern highways which are safer and more resilient to bad weather. Starship Hospital has received a $25 million boost to its children's intensive care unit in today's infrastructure announcement. The government says it will spend $83 million on child health and $96 million on mental health and addiction as part of its election year capital investment spend. Here's our health correspondent, Rowan Quinn.
Starship's intensive care unit's been under huge pressure with record numbers of admissions last winter and often more children than beds. The government says the funding will help pay for a planned expansion for the service that looks after children from all over the country. Some other hospitals will receive smaller boosts to maternity or child services. In mental health, Tauranga, the Hutt Valley and Whakatane will all get funding for new acute units. This is Rowan Quinn.
A proposed fee increase by the Teaching Council is being called the nail in the coffin for early childhood teachers. Teachers have been told their 3-year registration fee of $220 could be more than doubling due to the government pulling its funding. A Northland early childhood educator, Rhiannon Morris, says she feels like the Teaching Council hasn't thought about their sector.
Just another nail in the coffin for ECE. With the low wages already, it's hard to attract people to the ECE profession.
Rhiannon Morris says for many early childhood teachers, the higher fees will account for a week's wages. It's just past 4 minutes past 5. The former All Black Aaron Cruden has been named on the bench for his return from France to Super Rugby for the Chiefs. New coach Warren Gatland has named his squad for Friday night's season opener against the Blues in Auckland, with Bay of Plenty first 5 Caleb Trask in the starting 15. All Black Damien McKenzie starts at fullback in his return following the knee injury which ruled him out of the World Cup. Gatland says his selections are all about managing the players returning to competition.
I have to stress it's really about looking at the balance of the squad, and Aaron Cruden hasn't had any time with us at the moment, is in insurance has just come through, so he's available to play. It's a great opportunity for Caleb to start and to come in, and we're not trying to put him under any pressure. You just got to enjoy the occasion.
However, the former All Black hooker Nathan Harris will miss the Chiefs' entire season after recent shoulder surgery. The Black Caps must beat India in the third T20 Cricket International in Hamilton tonight if they're to keep the 5-match series alive. But the pace bowler Tim Southee says they need to improve more than just their batting and bowling. The Black Caps were competitive in Game 1 but outclassed in Game 2, and Southee says they also need a change in attitude and much improved fielding effort if they are to win tonight. The former world number 1 and 4th seed Simona Halep took less than an hour to storm into the semi-finals of the Australian Tennis Open, thrashing Anett Kontaveit 6-1, 6-1 in their quarterfinal. That's the news.
Election day revealed.
What matters, I think, is money in people's pockets are real things for everyday New Zealanders about getting around in the traffic and dealing with the gang problems we've got.
Plans for peace.
Today's agreement is a historic opportunity for the Palestinians to finally achieve an independent state of their very own.
And New Zealanders trapped in Wuhan.
We don't want to stay here maybe 2 or 3 months more.
Your daily hit of news, Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Long, fine spells, isolated afternoon and evening showers. Thunderstorms, localised downpours possible in Northland, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay tonight. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country, also Wairarapa. Occasional showers or drizzle, possible thunderstorms inland tonight, then clearing later tomorrow. To Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy periods at first, a few showers especially tonight. Fine tomorrow, norwesterly gales developing inland. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, easing in Fiordland tonight, elsewhere overnight. Rain returns to Fiordland and Westland late tomorrow. Otago and Southland, a few showers with possible thunderstorms about eastern Otago, turning to rain for a time this evening. Mainly fine tomorrow, evening rain in the south. Severe norwesterly gales developing in exposed places tomorrow afternoon. Chatham Islands, rain tonight and tomorrow morning, then clearing. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 5. Thanks, Susanna. In a moment, the government's infrastructure announcement, the budget, the projects, the timeline and what it means for you. Plus, Finance Minister Grant Robertson joins us. But we begin tonight with the Serious Fraud Office, which today filed criminal charges against 4 people in relation to electoral donations paid into a National Party bank account. It comes after former National MP Jamie Lee Ross lodged a complaint with police last year. Mr Ross claimed while he was still National's MP for Botany, National leader Simon Bridges asked him to collect a $100,000 donation from businessman Yi Kun Zhang, which was later split into smaller amounts to hide it. The 4 defendants who have not been named will appear in court later next month. National leader Simon Bridges declined to be interviewed tonight, but has confirmed neither he nor his party has been charged. The SFO says it also won't be commenting until suppression issues have been dealt with. But joining us now is Otago University law expert Andrew Geddes, who has been following this case closely. Good evening, Andrew. How unusual is it for these kinds of charges over election donations?
It's unprecedented. So it's the first time that any such charges have been filed in New Zealand. We are assuming, of course, that the Serious Fraud Office charges do relate to how those donations were paid in to the National Party accounts or something along those lines, rather than having discovered some sort of unrelated offending while they were looking into that issue. But assuming that it is to do with how the donations were paid over, it's the first time such charges have been brought in New Zealand.
So the National Party was very quick to confirm its leader, Simon Bridges, is not charged and no one from the National Party. Is that surprising?
Not particularly, no. For Simon Bridges to have been personally charged, he'd have had to do something along the lines of explicitly tell the donors, I want you to pay this money to my party in this illegal way. And whatever we may think of politicians generally, no politician is going to be that stupid to say something that outright. And with regards to the National Party itself, the party secretary, who really is the one on which legal liability falls, their obligation is simply to receive donations and then in essence, bank them and then pass information on to the Electoral Commission. So the party secretary has no duty to go checking that the information he's given about donations is accurate or true or anything along those lines. So once again, the party secretary was entitled to, rely on the fact that, I've been told these donations are from these people. I can confirm these people really exist, and that's all I need to know.
So does this mean that National's in the clear, in essence?
Well, I mean, they're legally in the clear because they've had no charges filed against them. So, they can say, look, we complied with the law. The question is really whether mere compliance with the law is sufficient for political parties. It does appear that the reason why these donations were split up was that the National Party didn't really want to have a disclosable donation appear on with the Electoral Commission for the public to see, and then the public asked questions, how come you're getting that money? So one of the questions we might ask of the National Party, and I think more generally about our political parties, is, is this sort of fundraising, morally acceptable, no matter what the law might say about it?
So, obviously, one of the core issues there being that the larger donations potentially can be split to a size that flies under the radar in terms of what's required to be reported. So, what does it tell us about our current rules?
Well, I think it shows the current rules don't really work. At the moment, the law says anything above $15,000 to a party must be disclosed to the Electoral Commission. But if you get a group of people together, each of whom give under $15,000, and all that money is then bundled together and passed across to the party, you can get a really big donation going into the party, and the public never gets to see who's behind it. So I think what this shows is that when $15,000 was put in as the threshold back in 2010, that was a compromise between Labour and National at that point in time. I think this and sort of other events show that $15,000 was just too high.
So if we just pull back from this at the moment, big picture, it is election year. Obviously, political donations are going to be a subject of interest again. Is this a warning to parties to get their houses in order?
Well, I think it is. As Simon Bridges and the National Party have said in their release, look, we haven't been charged, and they're trying to say this has nothing to do with us. We're innocent parties here. The question is whether the public's going to look at it and go, yeah, well, hang on, there's going to be people in court charged with offences here. You took the money, to what extent are your hands legally clean but, some way morally dirty? It's not, I think, enough for parties simply to say the law is all that is required of us. I do think there ought to be a little bit more in parties to, comply with spirit as well as intent.
And we're also waiting, obviously, for ongoing scrutiny around the New Zealand First Foundation as well.
That's right. So the Electoral Commission is still looking into the New Zealand First Foundation and, what appear to be some odd behaviour and how it receives money and then pays for bills on the political party's behalf. If the Electoral Commission believes that offences have been committed, then the Electoral Commission is required to pass information over to the police and then the police investigate.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Professor Andrew Geddes, who is an Otago University law expert. Speaking there about the fact that 4 people have been charged in relation to the SFO investigation into donations paid into a National Party electorate bank account. Those people appear in the Auckland District Court in February. The government's touting the multi-billion-dollar infrastructure package as the biggest investment in a generation. But National's accusing it of just dusting off plans it was progressing when it was in power. The Prime Minister has revealed dozens of roading and rail projects around the country and more money for DHBs to come out of the $12 billion infrastructure fund. Roading gets the lion's share with nearly $5 billion, with $2.2 billion of that going to Auckland. But the opposition is scathing, saying the government's been embarrassed into picking up projects that were in the pipeline under National. They've tweaked them to claim them as their own. There are also questions about whether there's enough physical labour and capacity within the industry to make these projects a reality. Jacinda Ardern made the announcement in lieu of the more traditional State of the Nation speech in Auckland. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, was there.
The $12 billion fund was unveiled last year, and the government's been drip-feeding information about how it will be spent, saving the big announcement to kick off election year.
The most significant investment in public infrastructure in a generation, designed to future-proof and grow our economy.
Jacinda Ardern also taking aim at the previous national government.
New Zealand has had underinvestment in the core public facilities we all use, and that has happened for too long.
There's just shy of $7 billion tagged for transport spending, just over $1 billion for rail and more than $5 billion for roads. The National Party leader Simon Bridges, also a former transport minister, told reporters the government's just picked up where National left off.
It's literally all of National's work, and it's all things that the government cancelled at the start of their time in office, whilst they've done nothing since then other than sort of argue and discuss.
A number of the projects have appeared in various plans and proposals, both under this government and the previous one. Ms Ardern insists this is the first time they've had specific funding put behind them, and National should defend its own record.
They had 9 years, they didn't do it. We have modernised these projects, we're funding them and we're delivering them.
Rail, a key policy for New Zealand First, and its leader Winston Peters gets $1.1 billion for projects in the North Island. As part of the roading package, State Highway 1 from Whangarei to Port Marsden will be upgraded to 4 lanes to improve safety and allow more freight, as Cabinet Ministers are still considering the Northport proposal, a New Zealand First initiative.
If you're looking forward to the future, and it's already acknowledged now that the movement of this port is inevitable out of Auckland. Now, every smart economist and every smart politician internationally would say, if you're going to have to go one day, plan now.
Both Labour and the Greens have been critical of National's past plans to spend money on state highways, including the current Minister, Phil Twyford. So what's changed?
National's policy was to build large new motorway projects at the expense of every other part of the system. That was a low-value policy.
The Greens co-leader and Climate Change Minister James Shaw was asked how he could put his name to a package with so much money going into roading.
Obviously, if we were holding the pen on the whole package, we would have prioritised a different mix. But you can't take away from the fact that there's $1.8 billion of this package that is devoted to rail, light rail, cycling, walking infrastructure.
Alongside the money for road and rail, there's $300 million for DHBs, including more money for maternal and mental health services. $400 million for school property upgrades was announced last year. There's also $300 million for regional development projects, the details of which will be announced by the Minister Shane Jones in the coming weeks. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And as you heard there in Jane's story, the government has accused National of sitting on its hands for 9 years and touting so-called ghost projects that were never actually funded. That's something National says is simply not true. A short time ago, I spoke with Finance Minister Grant Robertson, but before we got on to the infrastructure spending, I asked for his reaction to 4 people being charged following the SFO investigation into National Party political donations.
Oh, look, issues between the Serious Fraud Office and the National Party are ones for them to deal with, and it's just not something I'm in a position to comment on.
Particularly pertinent in election year, though, can you assure us that the Labour Party's house is in order in terms of donations?
Look, to the best of my knowledge, absolutely, but obviously those are questions that would need to be put to the Labour Party.
OK, so the election date was announced yesterday and then, surprise, today, $12 billion in spending announced. Did you plan it that way?
Well, in fairness, we first announced our intention to go down this path in December last year, and then at the half-yearly economic update in mid-December, we outlined the detail of the split among the $8 billion now and $4 billion in the budget. So we had to announce it. We were under quite a lot of pressure, if I recall, actually, from a number of journalists to get it out as soon as possible. And we've done that as the political year begins. And I think it's important. These are really important projects, and they're ones that stand up on their own right, regardless of whatever part of the political cycle we're in.
So why now specifically in terms of the volume of spending?
Yeah, well, I think it's been a really important thing for us to make sure that we've managed the books carefully over the last couple of years. So when we came into office, we inherited a net core crown debt figure of 22.7% of GDP. We worked hard over the last couple of years to bring that down to just under 20%, and that's given us the fiscal space to be able to do this kind of spend. At its maximum point, this program will mean that net core crown debt will be 21.5%. In other words, less than what we had when we took office. So the books are in good shape. Interest rates are low, about 1.5% for 10 years, and the projects are there to be done. We've rescoped these projects over the last couple of years, and we're really confident they now add really well to the balance of our transport package.
But the thing is, even that level of debt when you came into office was relatively low comparatively, and interest rates have been below 2% since November 2016. So why have you waited so long?
Well, as I say, we had some obligations around what we said we would do when we came into office. We wanted to get on to with other spending. So let's bear in mind we haven't not been spending over the last two budgets. Both Budget 2018 and Budget 2019 had significant lifts in spending, particularly in capital spending. $2.4 billion in health, billions of dollars in education, and indeed significant investment in transport as well. So there was a lot to do when we first came in. We had to fix our hospitals, rebuild our schools, get our rail network going again, and yes, do some roading projects. The great thing is the economy's in good shape, the books are in good order, and we're now in a position to be able to make this very large investment today.
Okay, so in terms of today's announcement, when we look at the transport aspects of it, a lot of it looks familiar. So how much of what you announced today around roading and transport is actually new?
Well, it's all new because whatever ideas previous government might have had, they did not do any of these projects. There was no funding set aside for all but one of the major roading projects that's been announced today. What we've done over the last 2 years is rescope them so that they're effectively fit for purpose for the kind of modern transport system we want. So, for example, we're going to be able to have dedicated public transport lanes. We're going to have walking and cycling alongside these roads. So we've rescoped these roads over the last little while, but they, for the first time, they're properly funded, and that is a significant step forward for New Zealand.
Okay, because in 2018, when the Auckland Transport Alignment Project was announced, in conjunction with the government, with the Minister for Transport, Phil Twyford, there with Phil Goff, they announced Penlink, Mill Road, the Sky Path, and electrification to Pukekohe. And at the time, when I looked back at the coverage, Phil Twyford is quoted as saying that the projects were fully funded.
Yeah, and the great thing here is these are now being brought forward. So the three elements that make today different are the projects are better because we've rescoped them, they're going to be done faster, and they're all fully funded. And this actually opens up the opportunity within the Auckland Transport Alignment Program.
But sorry, Minister, for clarification, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Which is really important.
Sorry to interrupt. So they weren't fully funded when they were announced in 2018?
Of course they were fully funded, but this has allowed them to be brought forward, which is really exciting for the people of Auckland because it opens up the opportunity for other projects within that Auckland Transport Alignment Program.
So the projects aren't new, the fully funding's not new, it's just the time frame that's altered.
No, that's not correct. Across this project, we have projects that are brand new that have not been talked about before. We have projects that have been rescoped significantly, including ones that you've mentioned, such as Mill Road. But critically, there is funding here. And compared to the last government, who made significant promises about what they said they would do, they didn't do it, and they didn't put the funding aside. That funding is now baked into the accounts, and communities right around New Zealand tonight, I'm sure, won't be too concerned about whether it was National or Labour who did whatever. They will just be pleased that there is now money set aside so that their transport needs can be met, congestion reduced, travel times improved, and productivity increased.
So in terms of that, National, on the other hand, says that you've wasted 2.5 years getting projects back up and running when some of those projects were in the procurement stage under the National government.
Well, I think that needs a lot more analysis, that statement. In Tauranga, there was work being done, absolutely, but it hadn't progressed very far. For the rest of the roads that they made announcements about in August and September 2017, there was no project plan and no funding.
They say the road at Marsden, that they had tagged $400 million for that as well. So are you being totally upfront with the facts?
Absolutely, because I know as the Minister of Finance that money had not been allocated, and what I'm also aware of is that the kinds of projects we're now talking about, ones where there is provision for public transport, one where there is provision for cycling and walking, most definitely were not on their agenda at all. So there were only the vaguest of intentions. What you've seen today from this government is money being put on the table.
You have highlighted unemployment is around 4%. NZTA says they're going to need, 7,000 to 9,000 workers. Given that the labour market's pretty tight as it is, where are those people going to come from, do you think?
You look, that 7,000 to 9,000 number is actually the number of jobs they think will be created in the wider supply chain from the investments. But that's not to discount the fact that, yes, we definitely need workers here. We've spent a significant amount of time and resources over the last couple of years in supporting more young people into apprenticeships, working with the construction industry to make sure that we're getting as many people in to the workforce as we can. What we now can say, and what the industry have been asking us for, is certainty. They've got that certainty now. That will enable them to retain and recruit the staff, and we'll be working very, very closely with them. But look, you're absolutely right. The most common refrain I hear from the business community as I go around New Zealand is that they're on the hunt for staff. That's actually the sign of a growing economy, but we've got to work alongside the construction industry to make sure the staff are there. These projects are being rolled out over the next few years, and I'm confident that if we work well together, we will have the workforce we need.
Will we need more overseas workers to complete these projects?
It's possible. I mean, we are obviously got a priority here on training up New Zealanders to do this work, particularly getting young New Zealanders into the trades and into apprenticeships. But often we do need to supplement that with workers from overseas, and that may well be the case as we go through and put these projects into action.
Do you think you've got the balance right between funding roading projects and sustainable transport, given your government's stated commitment to dealing with the issues around climate change?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's really important to see these announcements today in the context of the wider transport program that the government's put in place. And obviously, we had all three parties of the government represented today, and the Greens have been a big part of making sure that as we've been moving forward on a whole transport program while we've been in government, that there is a focus around things like walking and cycling. The whole government is committed to rail in particular and getting trucks off our road, and rail is a great low emission source of transport for freight. We've all been working together and making sure that we have that focus on public transport as well. So I think we have got the balance about right. The reality is that roads will be part of our transport mix for as long as you and I will be around, Lisa, and way past that too, because buses run on roads, new electric vehicles run on roads. We do need to address issues around congestion. So I think we have got the balance about right, and we've particularly got these specific projects to be ones that cater for all different forms of transport.
That's Finance Minister Grant Robertson. It is almost 28 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about that. The Finance Minister thinks that the balance is right between roading projects and other sustainable transport projects. About $5 billion of the $12 billion is going on roading. So do they have the split right? How would you have spent the money? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Prime Minister has announced a joint New Zealand-Australian operation to evacuate people stuck in China due to the Wuhan coronavirus outbreak. The death toll caused by the respiratory illness has climbed to more than 130 and nearly 6,000 people are infected. Dozens of New Zealanders are stuck in Wuhan, and the latest advice to anyone thinking of travelling to China is don't unless you have to. Chen Liu reports.
We've got over 70 people there. Some are not New Zealanders, some are dependents. But looking at the big picture, we're going to have to see them all and see who wants to come and who doesn't want to come. Then we'll know what our transport needs are. And I'm confident that between Australia and others, we can, and our own defence capacity, we can help them.
That's the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters. He says New Zealand is in active contact with countries, including the United States and Australia, about evacuating New Zealanders from Wuhan. Auckland woman Vicky Lee is one of those waiting anxiously for any updates from the government. Like many others, she is in Wuhan visiting her parents for the Chinese New Year. Her young daughter and son are with her.
We have lived in New Zealand not just for one day or two. We have lived there for many years. We haven't brought back many things with us. All of our stuff is still in New Zealand. My daughter's formula powder is running out.
Ms. Lee says her son's visitor visa to China is going to expire soon.
If we're going to be stuck here for a while and our problems can be solved, I have no complaints staying. But no one is trying to help us solve those problems. I phoned the New Zealand embassy earlier and they were on holiday. We've been left behind. Nobody cares. It's really hard on us.
The Insurance Council is urging people to check their policy small print amid the outbreak. Its chief executive, Tim Grafton, says it's likely standard exclusions will apply if the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, which it hasn't.
A pandemic has potentially such astronomical costs globally that it's simply not possible for insurers or reinsurers to be able to calculate the risk and costs of a global pandemic.
With the Ministry of Foreign Affairs advising people not to travel to China, a spokesperson for the House of Travel, Brent Thomas, expects the impact to New Zealand will be minimal.
The low season at this stage, so normally people who are travelling to China are booking to go up in our winter, their summer, so that is more in the months of June, July, August, and corporate travellers at this stage are only just getting back to doing their bookings, and again this is the low season for corporate travellers.
Brent Thomas says the problem is that there is no way to predict how long the outbreak is going to last. Mutahotaka o te ahi nei ko chanleo tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, lids on or lids off? Do you know what types of plastics can go into your recycling bin? Stand by. Will we see a TVNZ-RNZ merger by 2023? And is it time to raise the superannuation age? We would love to know what you think of all of those topics. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now to get to the headlines with Susanna.
New Zealanders in China are waiting anxiously for updates after the Prime Minister announced plans to work with Australia to evacuate citizens from Wuhan. The Foreign Minister Winston Peters told Checkpoint there are more than 70 nationals and dependents in the city where the coronavirus broke out, and he's confident they can be helped. An Otago University law professor says charges laid over donations to the National Party are unprecedented. The Serious Fraud Office has filed criminal charges against 4 people after a complaint made by the former National MP Jamie Lee Ross against the party leader Simon Bridges. Andrew Geddes told Checkpoint it is the first time such charges have been laid in New Zealand over election donations. Environmental campaigners have criticised the government's plans to spend $5.3 billion on highways, saying it goes against promises in the Zero Carbon Act. The Prime Minister announced the investment as part of a huge upgrade to road, rail and health facilities. The AA, however, says the country is in desperate need of more modern, safer highways. Donald Trump's new peace plan for the Middle East has been embraced by Israel, but condemned as a conspiracy by the Palestinians. The US president's proposal offer Israel Jerusalem as its capital and recognition of its West Bank settlements. Palestinians are offered cash and a truncated territory. Mr. Trump says the plan makes the region safer and more prosperous. Obstetricians are backing calls for mandatory training on fetal heart monitoring after 2 botched births at Hutt Hospital left 1 baby dead and another with brain damage. The former chair of the Perinatal and Maternal Mortality Committee, Dr. Sue Belgrave, says it made the same recommendation some years ago, but only some district health boards have taken it up. Police are searching for a deaf woman who communicates in writing after she went missing from the Auckland suburb of Onehunga on Monday. They say 60-year-old Wendy Seddon has grey shoulder-length hair and may have been pushing a pram full of clothing with a colourful striped covering. Those are the latest headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And you've arrived at just the right time, along with Nona Peltier, to talk about business. Nona, another survey. This one suggests that investors continue to shun high-yielding shares and managed funds. What's going on?
Yeah, well, another survey has shown the same thing. New Zealanders love their houses, their own houses, not even their rental houses. And they're hoping that those houses are their best investment and will return them a great capital gain. And that's what they're sticking with, forgetting all about the market, KiwiSaver, and other kinds of managed funds, which have been returning quite high yields over the last few years. And so this latest survey by ASB is really not that different from ones we've seen in the past, where Kiwis just say, hey, we just rather own our own house, that's our investment, and forget the rest. Why, you might ask? Well, there was this crash in the 80s where a lot of New Zealanders lost a lot of money in the market, and they've never come back. So while, in the last year, our NZX Top 50 Index gained 30% in value, a lot of New Zealanders simply have missed out on that.
The thing being, though, if you consider your house the investment and it's the roof over your head, you can't cash it out.
Well, you can always put it in a term deposit because it's as safe as houses, but also returns very little.
Yeah.
So you're basically putting your money under your mattress, literally, and one day in the hope of getting a capital gain. But you're still going to have to live somewhere. So the idea is you should really think about other kinds of investments. People who are a little bit worried should probably get some financial advice and look at maybe a more balanced approach to their investments.
Let's talk about Huawei New Zealand, okay, because this has come up in the news today because of obviously the UK. Is Huawei New Zealand more hopeful that its equipment will eventually get rubber stamped for use in the 5G network?
Yeah, definitely more hopeful. So we spoke to all the telecommunications companies today. None of them wanted to comment any further than the sort of statements they've made in the past, which is basically we're doing nothing, going with what we have and just sitting on our hands, which is fine. It opens an opportunity for Huawei. So up until recently, they had no show whatsoever of even getting a meeting with the government officials. Like, they haven't met to discuss their issues at all. So in their sense, they're saying, well, look, any security issue can be addressed. All networks have security issues. We can address whatever the government's issues are, if only they will just tell us what they are. So if we meet with them, that'd be great. That's the first step. They're hoping to get a meeting within the next few weeks. And if that works, then hopefully they'll be able to, persuade them that, like they persuaded the UK government, that they can be made secure and that security issues can be addressed. In any case, these pieces of equipment which Huawei use in their 5G networks internationally, it's only really the Five Eyes countries that have resisted. They're growing, Huawei is growing at a rate of, 24% in 5G. That's what they said today. Internationally.
Big numbers. Okay, speaking of numbers, what's been going on the market today?
Very little. So there you go. We started out pretty hot, looking like, because we took a lead from the US, which had moved up. But no, we lost all those gains once Asia digested the new fatality and illness numbers associated with the coronavirus. So we ended up a little changed, just ending down 9 points to 11,677. The dollar also little changed, just sitting there waiting. Now, this time it's mostly because of what the U.S. Federal Reserve might or might not do. They're having a meeting later today in the United States, and they're expecting no change in interest rates, so we'll see what happens. Meantime, we're at 65.3 U.S. cents, 96.4 Australian, and 50.2 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with all the numbers and business news. The government is being criticised for keeping the future of public broadcasting behind closed doors as it pushes ahead on a plan to merge RNZ and TVNZ. Ministers have signed off on a high-level decision to move towards creating a new supersized public broadcaster, but no changes to legislation will be made before considering a business case. The goal is to have the company up and running by around 2023, and that goal remains in place. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The Broadcasting Minister Chris Farfoy was told by Cabinet back in December to do more work on his plan for TVNZ and RNZ. He has now been given the green light to commission a business case. The government is yet to publicly announce any details of its plans. When questioned by reporters about yesterday's Cabinet discussions, the Prime Minister is keeping mum.
We haven't made any announcements off the back of any discussions by Cabinet, but what we have been really clear on is that in this current media environment, it's important now as it's ever been to make sure that we protect and build our public broadcasting.
National Party leader Simon Bridges is against the idea of one big public broadcaster.
I do accept that something has to give. We are seeing a strained media environment, but I do want to see a lot of voices, and my concern is that a merged public broadcaster would be all too powerful and monolithic.
National's broadcasting spokesperson Melissa Lee is yet to receive any update from Minister Faafoi on the government's plans. RNZ understands there was pushback from some ministers about the way the preferred option was landed on, the implications for public broadcasting if RNZ ceased to be a standalone company, and the speed at which it had been progressing. Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says it makes sense to do a business case before proceeding further.
It wasn't my penchant to support this thing, but if you're looking at the big pictures, I made a speech, was it late last year? Look at the big picture, the fourth estate is critical. I wish you guys would realise that and do a better job at it, but it's critical for democracy. We're looking now at the business case.
Victoria University's Associate Professor of Media and Communication Studies, Peter Thompson, says the government will be cautious about releasing details because of commercial sensitivity. But he says it is making it hard for stakeholders to actually have a say in what is being planned.
I think it's actually quite important to put some kind of basic blueprint out there for public discussion. I think that would be a fundamental part of the democratic process. So I think it's time that the government did front up, and I think it's time that they did make some of that information available, even if the commercial details haven't been worked out yet.
Dr Thompson also questioned the hold-up for a business case.
I think the question really is why they hadn't already done this. I mean, there were proposals up some time ago. I know they've had a change of ministers since they came into office, but the new government's really now in its third year and only just getting round to formulating its plans. So I think these delays are unfortunate. Nevertheless, the business model does have to be investigated very carefully, and there's a number of tricky issues that this would have to take account of.
He says those tricky issues include whether the broadcasting entity should be both public and commercially funded, which would be problematic for RNZ. He says the business case would also need to investigate how TVNZ could receive both commercial and public money without distorting the commercial market. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
1 in 3 middle-aged people who live on their own earn so little they are facing poverty in their old age. Today's recommendation by the Interim Retirement Commissioner against increasing the age for superannuation has come with an ominous warning about the need to prepare for retirement. Peter Courts says people's preparedness presents a greater risk to most New Zealanders than the age of eligibility or the level of superannuation. Catherine Hutton reports.
Peter Courts' recommendation not to raise the retirement age is in stark contrast to the Commission's last 3 reviews, which argued an increase would match today's longer life expectancies. He told RNZ's 9 to Noon the real issue is about people's preparedness for retirement.
Tomorrow's retirees are going to be in much worse shape than today's retirees, and I think that's one of the risks in assuming that retirees of today is what they'll look like tomorrow.
Susan St John is the director of the Retirement Policy and Research Centre. She says baby boomers have come into retirement much better prepared than the next generation.
Many of them benefited from old-fashioned superannuation schemes, that they've had access to a very liberal universal New Zealand super, and that they've been able to work. All sorts of factors have acted to their advantage. They've been property owners, and that's been extremely important.
Miss St John's own research shows that fewer people will reach retirement with a mortgage-free home, and many face high weekly rental costs as the property market soars. It also found that people who are between 45 and 64 who are living on their own have the highest rate of income poverty behind solo parents, at 29%. She says these people have periods in and out of work, have run down their assets and are reliant on inadequate welfare benefits.
I think that the Retirement Commissioner is right to say that we need to review the policies that apply to that age group. And in particular in the welfare system, there's some very grave anomalies and injustices, the way that the welfare system works for those that can't work and support themselves in that older pre-retirement category.
Miss St John says she supports the Commission's view not to increase the age of eligibility, but says the country isn't addressing the elephant in the room, and that's the cost of New Zealand super and whether there are better uses for that money. Last year, New Zealand super cost $14.5 billion, and that's increasing by $1 billion each year. By 2024, it will cost the country nearly $20 billion a year. She says the problem is there's a proportion of that money that's going to very high income superannuitants. She favours a universal grant at 65, paid at the net rate of national super, but there would be a clawback for those earning extra money, either through working or their investments.
That money is taxed on a separate scale, and that scale is progressive, so that it means that after a point, maybe quite a high point, maybe well over $100,000, that the effect of that clawback would mean that there was no advantage to having the grant.
She says Treasury has costed this proposal, and it's possible to save between 10 and 15% of New Zealand's super annual cost, taking it from people who wouldn't even notice. On Wellington streets, the idea received mixed reviews.
If you've earned your money over your lifetime to save up for your retirement, then you should get to enjoy that, really. You shouldn't be taxed for being lucky enough to have these extra things.
If there's people who have investments, then they're going to be in the higher bracket of earners, and I think that a progressive tax where the people who earn more are taxed more is appropriate.
Peter Court says what's required is a shift in thinking, where broad policy discussions are aligned, something he says the incoming Retirement Commissioner is best placed to lead. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
It is 14 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about that. Are you prepared for retirement, and what should we do with the age? We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. US Democrats are continuing to push for witness testimony in the state impeachment trial of Donald Trump. The president's legal team has wrapped up its opening arguments at the trial, urging lawmakers to acquit him. Senators now have 16 hours spread across the next 2 days to submit written questions to both sides. But the questions Democrats really want to ask are to former National Security Advisor John Bolton. CNN's Sarah Murray reports.
The trial of the leader of the free world and the duly elected President of the United States. It is not a game of leaks and unsourced manuscripts.
President Trump's defense team warning today that impeaching the president would be dangerous.
Danger. 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 You are being asked to remove a duly elected President of the United States, and you're being asked to do it in an election year. In an election year.
Why not trust the American people with this decision? Why tear up their ballots?
The arguments from Trump's lawyers come after the New York Times reported former National Security Advisor John Bolton wrote in his manuscript that Trump told him directly he was withholding security aid for Ukraine until Ukraine pursued investigations into Joe Biden and his family. Today, Trump's team used the president's own words to defend him.
Here's what the president said in response to that New York Times piece. I never told John Bolton that the aid to Ukraine was tied to investigations into Democrats, including the Bidens. If John Bolton said this, it was only to sell a book.
And used lawmakers' decades-old comments against them.
There must never be a narrowly voted impeachment.
This is unfair to the American people.
The Republicans are crossing out the impeachment standard of high crimes and misdemeanors.
So this should end now, as quickly as possible.
Next up, senators get up to 16 hours over 2 days to question House impeachment managers and Trump's defense team. Democrats are expected to use much of that time hammering home their call for witnesses in the hopes of winning over moderate Republicans. Today, Senator Mitt Romney signaled he would be open to a witness swap.
I'd like to hear from John Bolton, and I think the idea that's been expressed in the media about having each side be able to choose a witness or maybe more than one witness on a paired basis, it has some merit.
Senator Lisa Murkowski said Bolton probably has some things that would be helpful for us, while Senator James Lankford suggested senators should first be able to review Bolton's manuscript, then make a decision on witnesses.
We can read all of it and see for ourselves if there's anything significant there.
Sarah Murray with that report. Israel Folau, the former rugby and rugby league superstar, has returned to the headlines, this time because he's got a new team. The controversial former Wallaby is moving to France to play in the UK-based Super League competition. Folau hasn't played rugby or league since being sacked by Rugby Australia last year, following his homophobic statements on social media. The ABC's Linton Besser reports.
Israel Folau, the try scorer, after just 14 games of Super Rugby.
Emblazoned across the slick online promo, the words "Bienvenue Izzy," confirmation of the rumours that former Wallaby and State of Origin star Israel Folau has been signed by French league club the Catalan Dragons. And with that, the massive UK-based Super League competition was thrown into controversy.
Catalans, you have to question why they would want someone who has been so public in their controversial views and, homophobic views, you have to say.
That's Matthew Shaw, a writer for League Express. He says condemnation of the decision will only grow louder.
I've spoken to officials at 6 or 7 of Catalans' rivals now, and they are all very, very strongly against what Israel Folau stands for and the comments that he's made in the past. Israel
Folau hasn't played since Rugby Australia terminated his contract last May after he published remarks on social media that homosexuals were condemned to hell along with drunks, fornicators and atheists. In December, the two sides released a joint statement confirming an out-of-court settlement had been reached to bring to an end his legal claim for unfair dismissal. There were reports he received as much as $8 million. A month earlier, at a church in Sydney, he delivered a sermon which linked the bushfires along the eastern coast of Australia to same-sex marriage.
Look how rapid these bushfires, these droughts, all these things have come in a short period of time. You think it's a coincidence or not? God is speaking to you guys, Australia. You need to repent and take these laws and turn it back into following what is right by God.
The media manager for the Catalan Dragons, Yannick Ray.
He's one of the most exciting players on the field, and we want to make him shine again on the field.
In a statement on the club's website, Folau pledged that, "I'm a proud Christian, my beliefs are personal, my intention is not to hurt anyone, and I will not be making further public comment about them." Are there no concerns at all about the controversy which has surrounded him in Australia?
Yeah, of course we are, and his opinion, and we ask him to keep his opinion for him in the future.
For many, the decision was deeply disappointing. Gay league player Keegan Hurst of the Wakefield Trinity said he was shocked, and he criticised the governing body, Rugby Football League, for allowing Folau's registration. Meanwhile, one rival club, Wigan, has taken a novel approach in how to respond to the controversial signing.
By announcing that their game with Catalans in round 6 will be Pride Day, and they will be celebrating the whole community.
The Super League season begins on Saturday, but Israel Folau won't be on the field. He has yet to arrive in southern France and still has to pass a club fitness test. It seems it won't be the only test that awaits him.
Linton Besser reporting. Now, this next story has been generating a lot of chatter in the studio in the control room. Do you know which types of plastic go into your recycling bin and which ones don't? Should you keep the lid on or take it off? If you're confused by the rules, well, it seems we all are, in your town, you're probably not alone. New research from the Waste Management Institute shows almost 40% of plastics that can be recycled are ending up in the tip. To reduce that waste, the government's being urged to look at better labelling requirements for packaging, as well as national rules for curbside recycling. Our reporter Sarah Robson has the details.
New Zealand households throw out 1.7 billion plastic containers in their rubbish and recycling bins each year. On the streets of Auckland, these people are trying to do the right thing.
Everything gets recycled. It goes into a plastic bin beside our normal rubbish bin, and then the kids take it out to the 240-litre recycling bin sort of twice a week.
I mean, I think it's common sense, to be honest, what goes in recycling, what gets put in a landfill.
You roughly can guess like which sort of plastic does go into the recycling bin, like the thin plastic ones.
But the research found almost 40% of the plastic bottles and containers that can actually be recycled end up in landfills. Sunshine Yates was in charge of the team that sifted through the bins of more than 850 households from around the country. First, they picked out all of the plastics and sorted them into their various types. Then Ms Yates says they were looking for a few specific things.
Were they clean or dirty? Did they have labels on them, like the sleeves that stop them from being recycled easily? Were they large or small bottles? So there was a whole lot of information we were gathering on the particular types of plastics and how people are recycling them, whether they're generally going to the rubbish or into the recycling bin.
Parul Sood from the Waste Management Institute says confusion is part of the problem. Across the country, different councils have different rules about which plastics they do and don't collect. And sometimes Ms Sood says it's hard to find the number on the packaging.
There definitely is a requirement for making labelling clearer, and if you've got a standard which says everybody will comply by these rules, the size has to be so much, this is what it means, it makes it clear for the consumer to understand it, that would definitely help.
The Associate Environment Minister, Eugenie Sage, says standardised requirements for labelling are being looked at by the government.
We've seen what has been done in Australia, and I think some of the examples of products where the resin code is absolutely tiny. No wonder consumers are confused.
But Eugenie Sage says companies, marketers and product designers need to get on board too.
One of the other things that came out of the report is the plastic sleeves that go around drink bottle and other containers, which confuse the optical sorters. They mean that high-value plastics like number one bottles end up being mixed in bales of low-value plastics and not being properly processed.
So what should you do with your plastic bottles and containers? Parul Sood has some advice.
What you need to be aware of is what gets recycled in your council area, and if there are rules in terms of saying, are you just doing ones and twos or are you recycling the entire lot? For example, in Auckland we do collect all the numbers, and in that case the first thing is you look at the number, you make sure your product is empty out of the container, you rinse it and put it in a recycling bin.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
But how worried should New Zealanders be about our rubbish recycling rates? Well, an Auckland waste consultant says we're being unfairly blamed for the poor plastic habits of food companies and shouldn't feel guilty when they've left us with no choice. Sandra lives with her 2 teenage children and her partner, and today our cameraman Simon Rogers and reporter Nita Blakeperson joined her for the filthy task of sifting through their trash.
Let's have a look. This is going to be a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
No.
My rubbish.
We've all got it.
So as a waste consultant, obviously I generally know what needs to be recycled and what doesn't, but my family are not always that great at it.
Here I've got some chicken steaks, that's soft plastics. And what have we got?
I've got bacon. You know, I mean, plastic, again, all the soft plastic is covered in grease. You can't recycle it.
Some medicine packets, that's plastic, not recyclable to my knowledge.
Yep, again, it's not just the bacon that's a problem. We've got the soft plastics around your tofu.
That's right, a lot of Glad wrap in here.
Oh my God, somebody put a banana in here. What's that doing?
This is a cheese packet. We've got frozen mangoes, soft plastics. We've got Whittaker's.
Yeah.
Good old chocolate,
like
yum.
chocolate.
What is that, AstroTurf, fake grass or something?
This is plastic AstroTurf. I'm not a zero waste household, as you can see.
We've got a sour cream bottle here, which has got a number 6 on it. So through our numbers 1 to 7, there are some which are much more recyclable than others. A 6 means that somewhere, someone could possibly recycle it, but it's got to be cleaned out. It's got to be thoroughly processed before that can happen, and basically you're not willing to do that, obviously.
Well, obviously one of my kids wasn't.
Looking through all of this food, the supermarket shop and food seems to be the biggest creator of waste.
It is, and the food companies and the packaging companies will always argue that, well, we have to do this for food safety. You know, oh, we need this, we can't get rid of all this packaging. Oh, they're always the holy grail of food safety. And I go back to design of product packaging. Okay, this is food. It's food contaminated. We can actually make compostable packaging that meets food safety standards. We actually just have to put the effort into redesigning that product.
Yep. So if we have a look here, this is
a week's worth of recycling.
What have we got in here?
Let's have a look.
We've got cans of fruit, peaches and guava. We've got bottles of cream, ice cream containers. What flavour was that? Yum. We've got pineapple, big plastic bottles. And so this is what we've found today, that plastic bottles are among some of the main things being thrown into the rubbish when they can be recycled. Obviously, your whānau know to put these in the recycling bin.
I'm very aware. My family hates shopping with me because I'm always looking at the packaging. I'm always asking questions. Can I get this without packaging? Can I leave this packaging behind? You know, I've just bought this product. Do you mind if I unwrap it here in your shop and leave the packaging there? So my family get really embarrassed by me.
And that was Nita Blake Person rifling through a rubbish bin to see what's recyclable.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei a tawa tēnei. An electoral law expert, Andrew Geddes, says questions remain for the National Party over its handling of donations, despite it being legally in the clear. The Serious Fraud Office has concluded a lengthy inquiry and filed criminal charges against 4 individuals, but neither the party's leader Simon Bridges nor party officials are among those charged. Mr Geddes from Otago University says even so, the public may still have questions about its actions.
The question is whether the public's going to look at it and go, yeah, well, hang on, you know, there's going to be people in court charged with offences here. You took the money, you know, to what extent are your hands legally clean but, you know, some way morally dirty?
Andrew Geddes says the charges appear to be unprecedented. The Automobile Association says the huge investment in roads announced by the government is desperately needed. More than $5 billion will be spent on new and improving roads, including 2 big highway projects. Some environmental groups have criticised the focus on roading, but the AA spokesperson Barney Irvine says the country is in need of more modern highways.
These projects include some of the most dangerous sections of highway in the country, so there are really important safety benefits. What these new high-quality roads make for is safer, faster travel and more resilient.
Barney Irvine from the AA. And the Green Party is defending the infrastructure package despite it being road heavy. The Greens co-leader James Shaw says if he was writing all the cheques he would have prioritised a different mix, but he doesn't expect backlash from the party's base.
If you look at the scale of what we're investing here in cycleways and walking infrastructure, in heavy rail and light rail right around the country and in some of our most congested cities, I think that this upgrade is the most significant upgrade in public transport infrastructure in the time that I've been alive.
James Shaw, the leader of the Green Party and the Climate Change Minister. The New Zealand and Australian governments have decided to work together to try to evacuate citizens trapped in the Chinese city of Wuhan, the epicentre of the coronavirus outbreak in China. The death toll has jumped to 132, with nearly 6,000 cases in China. Japanese and US nationals are also being flown out of China as the virus continues to spread around the world. 3 more cases have been reported in Germany and 1 in Japan. The BBC's Fergus Walsh has the details.
To date, there have been 3 confirmed instances of person-to-person transmission of the coronavirus outside China. The Japanese case is a tour bus driver in his 60s who'd ferried around 2 groups of visitors from Wuhan. In Germany, a 33-year-old man was infected by a Chinese woman while they were on a training course in Bavaria. She only fell ill on the plane back to China, which further strengthens the evidence that some people are contagious before they develop symptoms.
Fergus Welch with that report. The Primary School Teachers Union says doubling the teacher registration fee could be too expensive for some. Teachers have been told their 3-year registration fee could be increasing by more than $200 due to a reduction in government funding. The president of the Educational Institute, Liam Rutherford, says the reaction from teachers has been shock and frustration, especially those working part-time or in early childhood education. Donald Trump's legal team has wrapped up its opening arguments in the president's Senate impeachment trial. There is growing pressure on Republicans to allow witnesses to be called in the trial. The president is accused of using the power of his office to pressure Ukraine's leader to investigate his political rival Joe Biden. Mr. Trump's lawyer, Pat Cipollone, has urged lawmakers to acquit the president.
And I have every confidence in your wisdom. You will do the only thing you can do, what you must do, what the Constitution compels you to do. Reject these articles of impeachment for our country and for the American people.
Pat Cipollone, who was representing Donald Trump in his impeachment trial in the Senate. It's 6:04. The Black Caps must beat India in the third T20 Cricket International in Hamilton tonight if they're to keep the 5-match series alive. But pace bowler Tim Southee says they need to improve more than just their batting and bowling. The Black Caps were competitive in Game 1 but outclassed in Game 2. And Southee says they also need a change in attitude.
Something that we pride ourselves on as a New Zealand cricket side is the way we field and the way we carry ourselves in the field, and I think it's been a bit off in the first 2 games, so there's one area that can lift, and it's something that's not reflective of how you're batting or bowling. It's an attitude thing.
Tim Southee. The match starts at 8 o'clock. The Blues have surprisingly left loose forward Akira Ioane out of their matchday squad altogether for their opening Super Rugby match of the season against the Chiefs in Auckland on Friday night. Newcomer Hoskin Sotutu will start at number... They haven't given me the number. While Stephen Perofeta will start at first 5. A Next Games event scheduled for next month in China's northern Hebei province has been postponed due to the coronavirus outbreak. It was to be the first Winter X Games to be held in China and was being held in the same area as the alpine events for the 2022 Winter Olympics being hosted by Beijing. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, The Passage of the Damned, Elspeth Hardy tells the true story of how in 1797 the British government pressed a group of French and German prisoners of war into guarding a ship carrying 68 convicts to New South Wales. Well, of course they mutinied, and we speak to the brains behind Testosterone and its extremely gender-fluid play opening in Auckland next month. So join me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Long fine spells, isolated afternoon and evening showers. Thunderstorms and localised downpours possible in Northland, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay as well tonight. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country, as well as Wairarapa. Occasional showers or drizzle, possible thunderstorms inland, then clearing later tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy periods at first, a few showers especially tonight. Fine tomorrow with northwest gales developing inland. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, easing in Fiordland tonight, elsewhere overnight. Rain returns to Fiordland and Westland late tomorrow. Otago and Southland, a few showers, possible thunderstorms about eastern Otago turning to rain for a time tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow, but evening rain in the south. Severe norwesterly gales developing in exposed places tomorrow afternoon. Chatham Islands, rain tonight and tomorrow morning, then clearing. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and thank you for joining us. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's return now to one of the big stories of the day, the government's massive infrastructure spend. Reaction to the Prime Minister's huge spend up on roads has been swift and mixed. Jacinda Ardern has revealed $5.3 billion will go on building new roads and improving existing ones, with the money coming from its infrastructure fund. The investment's being welcomed by motorists and rail users, but panned by climate change campaigners who say the government's gone back on its word. Anusha Bradley reports.
Traffic congestion and safety concerns about the intersection of State Highway 1 and 29 at Pierrere, south of Cambridge, have been keeping Irwin Hawkes awake at night for the last 3 years. So the news a roundabout will be built there in 2024 is being heartily welcomed, albeit cautiously.
I think it's fantastic. Best news I've heard all this year. Well, we've been in this position, this will be the third time we've been told something's going to be done. And I'm just a little blasé about it because nothing happens. I'm waiting to see when the bulldozers come and they actually start doing the work.
$1.1 billion will be spent on rail and $2.2 billion on new roads for Auckland, as well as a 4-lane highway from Otaki to Levin and a much improved Melling interchange in Lower Hutt. The AA's spokesperson, Barney Irvine, says the country's in desperate need of more modern highways.
These projects include some of the most dangerous sections of highway in the country, so there are really important safety benefits. What these new high-quality roads make for is safer, faster travel and more resilience to unexpected events.
The investment's also being welcomed by Business New Zealand and the Public Transport Users Association, which both say it's well overdue. The Chief Executive of the Road Transport Forum, Nick Leggett, agrees, but says some projects need to be fast-tracked.
For instance, the Otaki to Levin North Road is 2029. Well, I mean, we've got at least 3 elections before that date. So you do wonder with projects that are out, that have start dates that are pushed out so far, whether or not we can actually take them seriously.
However, the group School Strike for Climate Auckland describes the spending as disappointing, saying it's a 20th century solution to 21st century problems. Its spokesperson, Luke Wejohn, says it's frustrating that 4 times as much is being spent on a single motorway project than on paying for schools and hospitals to stop using coal burners.
$800 million is being spent on the Otaki to North Levin bypass alone. At the end of the day, this is a bunch of very bad projects grouped in with a bit of sweetener and cherry on top and then sold to us as climate action and boosting the economy when it's not.
Generation Zero spokesperson David Robertson says they'd hoped to see some of the big roading projects scrapped in favour of spending more on public transport. He says the government's failing to walk the talk, especially after passing the zero carbon bill last year.
But it feels like it's a real punch in the gut to see the government turn around and do something that's completely different to what it pledged to do in the Act.
Meanwhile, the Wellington Chamber of Commerce says it's disappointed the spend-up has completely bypassed the capital. It says the city urgently needs roading and public transport upgrades as congestion continues to rise, and questions why there is $700 million for a 4-lane highway to Marsden Point, but nothing for the 2-lane road to Wellington Airport. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The death toll from the coronavirus has jumped again to 132 and nearly 6,000 are infected. New cases have been reported around the world, including Germany, where 4 people from the same company were infected after one of them contracted it from a colleague while visiting their workplace in China. The US says it will expand screening of arrivals from China from 5 to 20 airports and is considering imposing further travel bans. And Hong Kong has made the move to close some of its borders with China in a bid to stop the spread. The BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
If Carrie Lam was aiming to calm fears in Hong Kong about the coronavirus, her face mask sent a different message. Mrs. Lam is under huge pressure now to shut the border with China, and today she partially capitulated. Intercity services to China will be suspended, she said. Flights will be cut by half. Ferries will also be stopped. By Thursday morning, the number of people crossing into Hong Kong from mainland China behind me here should be dramatically reduced. There will be no more ferries, no more trains, and no more mainland tourists. It is a very dramatic move that is being made by the Hong Kong government. But people here have very painful memories of what happened with the SARS virus back in 2003, and they now fear the same or something worse happening again. Doctors like Wong Yang Hom are leading the calls here for a complete border shutdown. They fear Hong Kong's hospitals could be quickly overwhelmed.
We have to do this now, and we have to do this in a very decisive manner before we have more knowledge about the disease, more knowledge about the virus, how long is the incubation period, what can we do to treat these patients.
From the epicenter of the viral outbreak, more extraordinary pictures today. Wuhan is the 7th largest city in China, with a population larger than London. It is not the government that has done this, it is fear. Britain today advised against all but essential travel to mainland China, and the Foreign Office is now finalising plans to evacuate the more than 200 Britons who are trapped inside Wuhan city. America has become the first country to begin evacuating its citizens. For the lucky few, it's a huge relief.
It's been pretty scary. I mean, we've been basically under house arrest, basically. You can't really go anywhere. All places are just closed down.
There are now signs of panic buying in other parts of China. These pictures are from Beijing. With many new cases of infection being confirmed outside Wuhan, anxiety about the virus is spreading too.
And that's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reporting. Australian scientists have come up with what could be a game changer in the race to help control the coronavirus outbreak. They've been able to recreate the virus in a special lab in Melbourne. It's the first time that's been done outside of China and means important information about the respiratory illness can be shared globally. The ABC's Penny Timms reports.
It's a major discovery which could hold one of the keys to beating the deadly coronavirus.
So 1,000 times stronger.
Awesome.
So it's definitely growing.
So we've got it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
The ABC has been given exclusive access to the Peter Doherty Institute for Infection and Immunity in Melbourne, the lab which has confirmed all of the Australian cases so far. And the scientists here are now celebrating a big breakthrough. They've been able to grow a lab version of the coronavirus.
We got our first patient on Friday, and we've successfully grown the virus from that patient.
The lab's senior scientist is Dr. Julian Druce.
So this will be a game changer for other labs within Australia, because at the moment no other labs really have positive control material to run their assays, so it's a little bit leading blind, and that's why other labs had to refer to us in first instances for confirmation of the testing.
Without the virus itself, that so-called positive control material, a vaccine is much harder to find and could take months to develop. Scientists need the virus to understand how it evolves and to trial vaccines. And while China has also created the coronavirus in a lab, it's only provided the international community with the genetic code. It hasn't shared a physical copy of it, not even with the World Health Organization. And it's that secrecy that makes the Australian discovery so important.
This virus will be used as positive control material for the Australian network of laboratories, and also shipped to the Europe for a WHO and a reference lab in Europe.
From there, the virus will be shared with other labs around the world to try and speed up the medical response to the disease. Dr. Mike Catton is the Doherty Institute's co-deputy director.
We'll package that up. We'll arrange the documentation that we have to arrange with the receivers and the authorities to get it across borders, because that's a complex issue that has to be done correctly and safely.
He says this development highlights the importance of special research labs in helping to curb outbreaks of dangerous diseases around the world.
Because both clinical care for patients and public health stamping out of outbreaks depends on the laboratory result. Everything starts with the laboratory result. Things that aren't detected quickly get out of control, like Ebola in West Africa.
But the team hopes this discovery will prevent the coronavirus from reaching epidemic proportions.
Penny Timms reporting. It's almost 18 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's the deal of the century, according to Donald Trump. The president has unveiled a plan for a new conceptual map that will see Jerusalem remain Israel's undivided capital and the US recognising Jewish settlements. It's a plan that's been hailed by Israel and roundly condemned by Palestinians. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen reports.
In the East Room of the White House, it felt more like a party than a press conference. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated each other. Their entourages clapped and whooped.
As everyone knows, I have done a lot for Israel, moving the United States Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights. And frankly, perhaps most importantly, getting out of the terrible Iran nuclear deal.
And now comes a document that attempts to seal Israel's victory in a century-long conflict, which Palestinians will read as surrender terms, not a peace proposal. It almost exactly replicates Mr. Netanyahu's deepest beliefs about Israel's security and its right to the land most of the rest of the world says is occupied Palestinian territory.
For too long, far too long, the very heart of the land of Israel, where our patriarchs prayed, our prophets preached, and our kings ruled, has been outrageously branded as illegally occupied territory. Well, today, Mr. President, you are puncturing this big lie.
In Gaza tonight, Palestinians demonstrated. Their side has been deeply divided. Opposition to the Trump document could finally unite them. The Palestinians were already boycotting the Trump administration because of its root and branch support for Israel. The Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, wasn't a party to the proposals and rejected them straight away.
I say to Trump and Netanyahu, Jerusalem is not for sale. All our rights are not for sale and are not for bargain.
They're arguing about land captured by Israel in the 1967 Middle East War. For a generation, the international consensus has been that no peace is possible without a Palestinian state on the land with a capital in Jerusalem. Today, the land is sliced up by walls, wire and checkpoints. The Trump plan wants to throw out the old consensus to offer a sort of state to the Palestinians if they agree to restrictions approved by Israel. And Israel has a chance to get bigger with what looks to be a green light to annex territory it wants, like here in the Jordan Valley. The timing suits the two leaders, a distraction from elections and serious charges, high crimes and misdemeanors for Trump, bribery and corruption for Netanyahu.
This may be the deal of the century for the Israeli government, but it's not for the Palestinians. It could create a sense of frustration, anger and hopelessness, which in such a combustible part of the world is dangerous.
Jeremy Bowen reporting. Teachers around the country could be paying almost double in registration fees if they want to remain in their jobs. The Teaching Council announced they intend to increase the fees to cope with the loss of funding by the government, and teachers aren't happy. Elizabeth Thompson has the story.
Bags are packed, pencils are sharpened, and teachers are starting the new school year. But for many, the potential of new registration fees going up is leaving them deflated. In an email from the Teaching Council, teachers were told the fee could be going up by over $200 due to the government pulling funding. Teachers were given two options, which could see the fee increase to either $470 or $500. For new graduates, that fee could increase to either $300 or $470. Lower Hutt primary teacher Helen says she left work yesterday feeling miserable and wanting a new job.
Obviously, we didn't get our point across last year that education's in dire straits. We're not able to support ourselves. And then we seemed to agree on this offer that seemed like in 3 years' time was going to actually help us improve things. It just seems like the government's trying to get back money any way they can from us.
Helen says this would be just another cost on top of what she already pays out of her own pocket for classroom supplies and union fees. She says she isn't even sure what exactly the money would cover.
It just doesn't make any sense why we have to pay to be able to do what we train for, what we have massive student loans for in the first place. Not many professions require you to pay to be registered. Surely our dedication and the work we do is enough.
She's worried that in a time of teacher shortages, this will just put more people off. The New Zealand Education Institute knows doubling the registration fee would be a significant hike. NZEI President Liam Rutherford says the increase was discussed after the strikes, but they were unaware of the details. He says they support the Teaching Council becoming independent and know the loss of 40% funding by the government will have to be covered. However, Mr Rutherford says the reaction from teachers has been shock and frustration, especially those working part-time or in early childhood education.
Early childhood teachers typically earn an awful lot less than primary and secondary school teachers, yet this fee is going to be the same for them across the board.
Northland early childhood educator Rhiannon Morris says she feels like the Teaching Council isn't thinking about their sector.
Just another nail in the coffin for ECE. With the low wages already, it's hard to attract people to the ECE profession.
Ms Morris says the cost would be 1 week's wages for some of her colleagues. But despite this, NZEI President Liam Rutherford is encouraging teachers to read information sent to them by the Teaching Council.
Teaching Council have done a good job of laying out exactly where the money goes in their consultation document, which is why we are encouraging people to make sure that they have read them so that when they're feeding back, they can be informed.
In a statement to RNZ, the Teaching Council says they understand the increase is significant, especially since it hasn't changed since 2010, and it won't make any changes until teachers have been fully consulted. They say the council is solely responsible for maintaining many things, including the quality of teachers and the safety of school children, and the fees will go towards that. If the increase is approved, it will take effect in July this year. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Thompson.
A relic of New Zealand's rail past has emerged from the mud 93 years after being dumped in a Southland river. The Lumsden Heritage Trust has been campaigning to retrieve the two 1885 V-class steam locomotives from the Oreti River for about half a decade. They're thought to be one of the last of their kind in the world. But retrieving them was no easy task, as our reporter Tess Brunton found out.
It was full steam ahead this morning, with water pumps on and a crane poised above the first locomotive, which first hit New Zealand tracks back in 1885. Recovery teams tried hoisting it, but the locomotive was too heavy to lift. Walking around the muddy riverbank, surrounded by willow trees, Site Safety Supervisor Russell Bradley explained why.
This is the main locomotive, and it was lying in the water on an angle like that, going back downhill. You can see the line across the front of the cab there where the water line was. This was all in the water, and that was the only bit exposed. So we stood it up, got it out here, put logs on it and set it to here, and now we've got to put it on at the end again and clean another 5 tonne of mud off it so we can lift it out.
Workers blasted it with water and hacked at the thick weave of willow roots, covering the machine with a garden hoe. Russell Bradley says he was excited to be involved.
My great-grandfather and my grandfather are both train drivers. Trains in our family have a bit of a history. I got on board with it. There was no question of it. I just got straight on board with it. Couldn't help myself. Had to be involved.
Lumsden Heritage Trust Chair John Teta says they're lucky they could even attempt a recovery. In the wake of World War I, the value of scrap metal was low, so instead locomotives were dumped in rivers around the country to act as flood barriers.
Even the guys, when we were digging out the other day, were jumping up and down because the running boards were there. When we moved it the other day, the wheels turned, which is incredible, really. I mean, 135 years old, they've been in the river for 93 years.
John Teta says this is the last opportunity to retrieve the locomotives. The consents are about to roll over and the landowner wanted to see action. The trust fundraised about a third of the $158,000 cost before securing the rest of the funding from other organisations. While they wanted to recover both machines, John Teta says it wasn't to be.
Over the last couple of days, it's actually gone from a massive task to a mammoth task. The suction on that thing there again, the suction being the silt holding it in, the tender itself weighs 22 tonne. He was pulling over 30 tonne on there trying to get it out. The locomotive is 32 tonne sitting on the track. You know, we believe there's probably another 10 tonne of silt in the boilers and things like that.
There was relief as the locomotive was hoisted into the air. John Teta says it was an unbelievable experience.
135-year-old locomotive, 93 years in the ground, and there it sits in a crane, eh? Unbelievable. Wow.
and emotions were running high as it was placed down onto the back of a transport truck.
Can't get any better than that, man. It could have just gone pop, break. There was a story behind this that we didn't really let out, that when they lighten these things up for New Zealand Rail, they weaken the frames. And so it's been sitting in my mind that the thing is the frame could snap in half at any time. We'd lose the pony trucks or the cylinders. But there it sits so far, getting on a transporter and into town, I think we're nearly there,
Southland District Councillor Rob Scott says it was a remarkable effort.
We were made aware of it, thought it was a bit of an old wives' tale that there was a train buried down here, and we came and had a look sort of early on, and it looked like a mammoth project, and it has been a mammoth project, but when you look at these operators that we've got together here, and it's a great network of really, really talented people, and yeah, they've pulled off something that was pretty impressive.
For Russell Bradley, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Every time I drive past it, I knew it had something to do with it. My grandkids, future. My granddad helped do that.
Russell Bradley says it will be up to the next generation to recover the second locomotive from the soon-to-be-restored riverbank. A crowd gathered as the recovered locomotive was placed in front of the Lumsden Railway precinct, a tribute to a bygone era. In Lumsden for Checkpoint, Ko Tesbrunton Tēnei.
And if you're listening on the radio, you can go online and see that salvage job, and the footage will be up there. On infrastructure, a lot of you getting in touch to say good on the government for spending the money, but a number of you highlighting the fact that maybe some of it should have gone on water and sewage pipes, not as pretty or as obvious as roads, but vitally important. Others of you want high-speed rail, Hamilton to Tauranga, and this one saying not sure whether government can get this done in the time frame allowed. On recycling, Seth says if people want to do the right thing around plastics, perhaps they should reconsider whether to buy all that crap in the first place. Recycling isn't a solution to waste, he says. It's a direct result of waste. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. New Zealand and Australia will work together to evacuate nationals from China's Wuhan, where the deadly coronavirus broke out. The AA says the government's new investment in roads is desperately needed, but some environmental groups have criticised the plans. An electoral law expert says questions remain over the National Party's handling of donations after the Serious Fraud Office filed criminal charges against 4 people. And officials in the Cayman Islands say there are no reports of injuries or damage after a magnitude 7.7 earthquake that hit this morning. Those are the headlines. We'll have our next news at 7 o'clock, and then following 7, Brian Crump is here with Nights on RNZ National.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
There certainly has been a commitment to address these issues, and the Ministry of Health is also involved with a nationwide maternity services review.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your